Hey everyone, so we are back with two very special guests today. We have James at the table, we have Pastor Lisa at the table, we have Shani Holmes at the table. So join us for a delightful conversation right after this video clip. Y'all, people are dying because they're waiting on us. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So
is the land of the free and the home of the brave who dress up as cowards on Sunday. We are in the midst of a civil rights tension. We feel like we're living through it once more and again. Too many of our churches in Georgia, even across the landscape of the nation, have faith, but they don't have justice. 93% of what Jesus did was outside of the church.
Right.
And now 93% of what we do is in the church. We have faith, but we have lost justice. Isn't it amazing that the black church always prays about the crime, but never addresses the poverty? Something is wrong in our church when we only have an economic agenda around a tithe. We want your 10%, but never tell you how to multiply the 90. Woe unto us as a black church that we're pointing to what we used to be and not what we presently are. And we've got to put our foot down and say, as for me and my house, not only will we serve the Lord, but we're going to graduate. As for me and my house, not only are we going to get a job, but we're going to create jobs. As for me and my house, not only are we going to have a checking account, but we're going to create generational wealth. As for me and my house, not only will my name be on the back of the check, but my name will be on the front of the check. As for me and my house, not only will we serve the Lord, but we'll look like Him.
Is that the camera?
that is pretty unique. I did not see that clip, but we are back. Today is May 2nd, 2022. We are pushing through the year already. And I am super excited because we have two very special guests with us. We have Pastor Lisa Musser, who's live in the studio with us. And we have somebody online. We have Shani, and I'm not going to put, because you didn't put your whole name out there. I'm not going to put your whole name out there. But we have
You can.
we have Shani Holmes with us too. And I have to start off here, right? I have been captivated by, I know you have a podcast you do every Thursday called Why Justice Matters,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I know Shani has been one of your guests on there a few times, and I was captivated actually by the conversation you guys had probably like a month ago. It got so in detailed and so indebted, like you guys had to do a part 2 of it. But it was really interesting when we kind of talked about some of these issues that that we thought were past our time, right? We think about, I know Shani, you joined us when we went to Selma, and we talk about like Selma, and even that moment, there's a clip that we have in one of our videos of us kind of coming down the hill at Selma, and there's police officers on the other side, and I just think that was very interesting because the view of that. But as you know, today is the beginning of election day in Georgia, right?
Yes.
Let's start off with voting, right? We understand that voting rights or we believe voting rights are under attack here in the great state of Georgia and across the United States of America. Shani, start with you. Why do you feel like there are so many states putting going out to protect our vote, quote unquote, like the great state of Georgia has done in its last election?
Well, I think the gist of it is that people of color are finally coming to see the strength of unity in a vote. And I don't think that that was perceived to ever happen, you know. And when it finally did happen, and I started to kind of see a curve right around when Obama was elected the first time, it was almost like people were saying to themselves, okay, now what do we do? And I feel like ever since then, there's been this scramble to try to dismantle, the unity that the Obama election, because I really believe that it hit supremacy from the left. I think they thought it was, as a matter of fact, I tell you a little story. I was a member of a country club at that time that's closed since COVID. And there was a meeting that we used to have. It was called Young Professionals Breakfast. And it was actually I remember in '07, right before the election, it was actually a joke at the table, because someone actually said at the table, well, Jesse Jackson ran in the '80s, ha, ha, ha. But it became less funny as we got closer to him winning. So I think that the scramble is about, what do we do now to suppress that vote?
And Pastor Lisa, I know this is something that you have been extremely passionate about. I know that your church has done work when it comes to voting rights issues and getting people out to vote. Why do you feel like the state of Georgia felt like they had to protect our vote when statistically, let's look at the stats, right? Okay. The fact of the matter is that the last election, 2020, we had more people come out and vote in the history of our country. More people actually came out and voted in the Obama election, believe it or not.
Right.
We know that every state that they have tried to contest, including Georgia, we know that every state has went through processes where they said like this was the most secure election by far ever in history. We know Russia didn't tap into it, wasn't doing anything crazy. What changed in Georgia that made them say that, hey, we have to protect the vote, quote unquote?
I mean, I think just cut and dry, when you have, like you said, an astronomical, a historic turnout specifically of Black voters. I mean, just an unheard amount. And, the efforts that were made to not only register, and yes, we had a voter registration drive for everybody at our church, but, just unprecedented efforts to register specifically Black minority voters and to get minorities to the polls to vote, and they did. And I think at the end of the day, this just goes, in my opinion, to show that overall, as a country, or specifically in the South, or I can just speak to the state of Georgia, that there's still such a stronghold of racism and still such a, mentality, which, I mean, not to get so deep into it, but really at the root of it is white supremacy, that there's a mentality that, now hold up, you can be here and vote, but not if you can't turn the state blue, and not even to get political about it, but the point is you can't have so much power, your vote's okay as long as it doesn't challenge us, the majority, the status quo, the majority. And so when, the vote does challenge and overturn the way things have been, then instead of, this is just what's mind-boggling to me, Sean, because it's facts, instead of them, looking and saying, okay, it's because, an astronomical amount of minority voters were registered and got to the poll. Instead of just looking at that's the facts, and they spoke, their voice was heard, that's right. But because it just speaks to how serious, and it's just really discouraging how, instead of just acknowledging, yes, Black people do have like Shani was talking about, yes, finally Black people have a voice and it's being heard. Instead of just acknowledging that, they're, they would rather do anything, find anything, just look for this, create things, and go on lies and untruths, than to just acknowledge the fact, then and to be happy. To me, we should be glad. Finally, everybody has a voice. Finally, your voice is being heard, and it's just really discouraging that. Well, guess what? It's really not. It's still trying to be suppressed. So, as you're fighting, with that victory came a renewed effort to, it might not be count the jelly beans in the jar or pay a fine you can't pay now, but it's, we're going to withhold the ballot boxes in your communities. We're going to, make stipulate. We're going to say count the jelly beans. It just looks different, and so it's sad to me, and it's. I mean, the state of Georgia and then Texas is right behind it, but things in the South and the country, but those strongholds that are in the South are still there. And so that's why we have to keep up the fight.
It's funny too, because if we kind of talk about that, we actually see that today, Fannie Willis is actually starting the grand jury process to try to convict, or try to see if there's enough evidence to go after the former president for trying to tamper with the vote, right? And I was re-listening to the audio last night. It was very interesting because I don't think you could have heard a black man on the phone with the Secretary of State or the governor's office saying, hey, I only need 14,000, and like to the T, like I only need 14,768 votes. That's all I need you to find, right? And for them to, and for him to even say on the audio, like that's one more vote than what we need in order to win your state.
Right.
And then the crazy part is that he's going after a state that even if he would have won Georgia, he still would have lost the election.
That's right.
So I mean, it didn't really make that much of an impact.
Right.
Now, I think that, whoever was telling him the numbers that he needed for the state of Georgia neglected to inform him of that part, that, even if you win Georgia, you still don't win the election.
You don't win.
And it looks different. And I agree with what has been said already. The status quo has been challenged because voters are turning out in mass numbers, and it's making a difference. So they can't, they're not able to do and just push through the program, their agenda, the way they've been doing in years past.
Exactly.
Things have changed. The people have voted, and they're getting out more. And
That's
more.
right.
And
That's
it's
right.
making a big difference. And so the only way they can fight it legally, the only way they can fight it is to change the laws within the state and just do everything they can that way. Like you said, it's still jelly beans, but it's in a different.
Sorry, it looked like we were having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are back, and it looks like we're still live. So we're back. I'm so sorry, Shani. That wasn't your fault. It was our fault.
That's all right.
Comcast. We got to make sure we pay our bill on time. No, but so even when we talk about that, we see that the past president, I mean, he's getting ready to they're getting ready to make moves. But then the part that threw me off is I think that Fannie Willis came out and said, DA Fannie Willis came out and stated that she's going to prepare the grand jury, but she's not going to move on the grand jury until after the May 24th election because she doesn't want to look like it's political. For those of us who've been waiting for justice, we've been waiting since January 6, 2020.
Right.
I don't know, or 2021, right? I don't know what that looks like. I mean, I don't understand how we have gotten as a nation where we don't touch certain things if it's an election season or not. If a person is wrong, whether they're wrong or wrong, they're wrong, right? I don't understand why we're sitting around here waiting after May 24th, because the reality is that let's think back to 2000 and 2012, right? Or 2016, when Hillary Clinton was running against President Trump. It was 3 days before the election that the FBI came out and said, hey, we may have found some additional emails. And then it was a day before the election that they came out and said, nope, there's nothing there to look at. So the mentality that we don't dig into stuff like this when it's political or when it's a policy time of the year, like shame on us.
The
Right.
Republican side will drop the bomb whenever they feel it's
Absolutely
necessary.
right.
That's the
The
truth.
Democratic side will back up and hold off, and because we don't want to be seeming as if it's a political move.
But this is the question I have too, though. So, you know, Michelle Obama, who I admire, don't get me wrong, she said, when they go low, we go high, right? And that has been what the Democratic Party has ran off of, and that's been their platform. But the reality is that as they've been going higher, the other side has just been going lower and lower.
Absolutely.
And the reality is that the only way we're going to win elections, I'm sorry, but we have to get down in the dirt. Right?
I agree.
Shani looks like she's in agreement on that part. Like, we have to.
Yes, 100%. I think it's time to get just a little bit dirty.
But not only dirty, I mean, the reality is that I'm not saying whether I'm Democrat or Republican, right? Most people are making an assumption based upon the fact that I sit here in this beautiful brown skin, what party I represent. But the reality is that I'm for voting rights being expanded for everybody.
Exactly.
That's right.
I'm also for the fact that, like, you know, we've been talking about here, like in the state of Georgia, it's unconstitutional for a person, let's say that Shani or Pastor Lisa wanted to bring a minimum wage increase to the ballot, right? As a citizen of the state of Georgia, I don't have the constitutional right to go out and work to bring that amendment to the ballot, right? The only way I can get that done is through my legislator. But in the state of Florida, they wouldn't have never passed the minimum wage increase if it wasn't for citizens bringing it to the ballot.
Yeah.
And even now, like people, I think one of the things that's most discouraging is that we talked about like people, what they're doing to try to restrict our vote, right? But the fact that for us, and definitely for African Americans, we don't understand the importance of voting. We don't understand the importance of actually waiting in line. We don't understand the importance of actually being out. And not only that, the sacrifices that came before us in order to make sure that was able to happen for us. Like most people don't even know, May 24th is the only ballot where we'll see judges on, right?
See,
You will not get a chance to vote for your judge in November.
come
May
on.
24th is
That's right.
it, right? And if I want to make a difference in the courtroom, if I want to say I want to be standing for social injustice or standing for the rights of ex-offenders, then I need to make sure I'm voting for a judge that looks at an ex-offender or looks at an offender as not just a number or a sheet of paper.
Right.
That's a person, right?
Mhm.
But most of the people won't get out and vote on May 24th.
Or they don't take the time. And I mean, this is just a challenge to everybody, is not only is that true, but what's even worse, makes it even worse is they don't take the time to look at the candidates. Like
Right.
Last night, and I'm not even saying, I mean, that I would vote for any of them, but and I know you watched one of the
I
gubernatorial
watched,
debates.
when you told me about it, I watched it last
Yeah,
night.
so there was one on last night. It was the Republican candidates, and there was an African-American woman, white woman, and 3 white men. And anyhow, the point being, like, just
I know
to
you
hear,
enjoyed one of them so much.
oh my, yeah, I've been having fun with one of them. But just, I mean, the fact that here are the people that are on the ballots talking from their heart. And I mean, I heard all kind of stuff from this one, but the point is just, they're saying where they are. You hear from their heart, and who's going to turn in a gubernatorial debate on PBS? Yeah, that's not the coolest thing to do on a whatever that was, Sunday night. But that was between NBA playoff games, by the way. But but then it's not like, some people say if you don't vote, you can't complain. I mean, you can still complain, but the fact is, like you said, Sean, when we have a chance to make a difference, and we have and it all starts on the community level first. Like you said, I've said that so many times that the judges, when you vote, when it's just a local election, people overlook those. And then also city council meetings. We have city council meetings open to the public. I know in my county, I used to go to them. I haven't lately, but they used to be every month right there in the public courthouse open to everybody, and you could bring anything. And what I found was a lot of the council members were already one way or another, and it doesn't matter what you brought to them, they already had a way they felt on it. But that all goes back to then when they're up for election or re-election, then I knew like that one is just stubborn in these old ways, or this one, and it was just based on me. But everyone has a right to, it's we the people, they work for us. Our
Right.
taxpayers pay all these people. And so I agree with you completely. So if they work for us, then we have to hold them accountable. And you do a great job of that with Black Push once they're in office. You're the one that says you made these promises. Now let's see if you're going to keep them. But we have these debates, they're just not glamorous things to do. But if you care enough, to prioritize your time to hear from the people you're voting, or if you say you care enough, but then you're not going to vote, but then they're going to be making the laws. They're going to be making laws about justice, laws about, criminal justice, all education, money. They're the ones, the council members get the money and determine where it goes. And if, that's important stuff, and it's really important on the local level first. So, we have to understand where we can, like you said, do a better job at exercising our voice, our right for our voice to be heard. And even if you go to a council meeting, you don't feel like you're heard, the voting and the judges is everything. And those judges that get in, on the local levels, they're the ones that eventually get to federal levels and the state levels and to the
That's
Supreme
right.
Court. They build up from that. So you can't underestimate when you vote a local judge in, what that person could be the next Supreme Court justice. So it's very, very critical. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go
No,
off on that.
I have a question for the whole table, right? And Shane, I know you're not sitting at the table with us, but you're sitting at the table, hypothetically.
Okay.
Do we feel like institutions have to do better? So you brought up a very valid point that last night we had a gubernatorial debate, right, on the Republican side, but it was kind of overshadowed by the fact that there are NBA playoffs, right? Do institutions need to do better? Because at the same time, they know that if a person goes down to seeing Stephen Curry play on a Sunday night, or watching Brian Kipp argue with Purdue and all these other people, which one are they going to choose, right?
DVR or DVD.
Yeah, but most people don't much know. But do institutions need to do better though? Could they do better, like to make sure that, hey, what's going on that night in particular? Can we work around it? Can we, instead of showing the game at 8:00, can we show the game at 9:00? So
they would have to accommodate like a whole nation full of schedules and votes.
They got the money.
I think we just need a DVD.
You're an NBA playoffs fan.
Yes, sir.
I think that I think strategically to have a gubernatorial or any kind of conversation, debate with candidates during playoffs or any sporting event that it's going up against for any particular day. It's strategic that they have it at that time, because if the new voters, minorities, are coming out in masses, well, they're stuck on watching the sporting event. They're not watching the gubernatorial thing. And if you said it was in between, sandwiched in between
somehow
games,
I saw
right?
both, so I don't know how I
But
did that.
so
so there's a challenge of making a decision as
Right.
do I watch the game or do I watch the debate? The game is more exciting.
Yes.
I may have something at stake, but in reality, the race is at stake, and you have more
Way
to lose
more.
because your
And
liberties within the state of Georgia are at
Right.
risk.
But when I say institutions, I'm not referring to just the NBA, right?
Right.
I'm referring as in general. One of the things that I heard Chairman Pitts talk about a couple of weeks ago, he's the chairman of Atlanta. He was talking about when COVID first happened, he reached out on behalf of the city of Atlanta. He called Mercedes-Benz, right? He was like, listen, we need more voting places. We need more space. I need y'all to partner with me on it, right? And it became such a replication that people from around the country started calling Fulton County. It's like, well, how are you able to build that relationship with Mercedes-Benz? How are you able to build that relationship with State Farm Arena, right? That's what I mean by institutions. Like these people who have platforms and have access to being able to do certain things, should we not hold them accountable? Like some institutions don't even allow that, don't even pay their employees to go out and vote, right? We're only have 10 employees, but yet we give 4 hours. We give 4 hours to go out and vote, right?
It should be a national holiday.
It should be a national
It really
holiday.
should be a national.
What were you about to say, Shani?
I was just going to say it absolutely should be, but it's about an agenda. I agree. If it was about rights, if it was about the progression of civil rights or people's ability to vote, I don't think that's a priority. And anytime there's two things competing against each other, I think that whoever is in charge of television, they tend to give you options that'll lull you to sleep. And that's just the way it is. Most people just want to be okay. People who live in reality understand that really security doesn't exist, but it's the lulling to sleep. I don't have to deal with this. I've got pressure, so I'll just watch the game, not understanding that your very life is at stake with the other channel. So that's my thoughts about it.
State, then you end up finding out that you get some laws on the books that come into play that are going to affect you as a gun owner, as a teacher,
Right.
as a parent, even.
Mhm.
And these are the kind of things that we need to be careful of. And like you said, voting for our judges today, and one of the things, like you said, they're not paying attention to who their candidates are.
Right.
But once you find out, and they go by name recognition, and which could be really detrimental, because name recognition might have you voting someone in or keeping someone in office that really doesn't deserve to be there, because they're the way they think and the way they do things are not in alignment or in agreement with what you believe.
Right.
And so name recognition could be very detrimental. So it's most important that we get out and make sure that we know who the candidates are and know what what's at risk when it comes to the various laws that are going to be voted in.
And I go back to the fact that as an African American person, one of the things that I always tell people is that just because it has a black face doesn't mean that it stands for black values.
Absolutely.
Clarence Thomas is a perfect example of it. So even today, there was one particular, I went and voted today, first off, just for everybody to know. I got my I vote sticker on today. But literally, there was one particular category of candidates. There were a whole bunch of black people running, right? I didn't vote for not one of the black people in that category. I voted for the person who was not black, right? Not because of the fact that I was so caught up in the fact that, a black person could be in this position. What is the platform that you stand for?
Right.
These are the things that you stood for in the past, right? The person who I voted for, we've actually met, went to lunch with and everything. And I know what he stands for. I know what's in his head. Some of these other people, I don't, right? I've seen them. I know of them. I know them. But their platforms in their personal, how they deal with people personally, is not something that's aligned with the values in which I'm trying to put into that particular office.
Right.
And I think that when we talk about voting, we can't talk about voting without talking about the lack of education that comes behind it. That people have to get out and educate themselves on who's running, educate themselves on the platform they're running on. And then once they get in office, we have an obligation, because they are employees of ours.
They are.
To hold them accountable to the promises they made.
Yes, sir.
I can go through a whole list of people who I know ran on progressive agendas in 2020 and have gone out since that time and have gone to the opposite side and been like, yeah, I ran on this agenda, but we're not going to really be working on this agenda. We're going to work on something else.
Right.
That's the reason why I have so much respect for Gwinnett County DA Patsy.
Yeah.
I absolutely adore her because of the fact that she ran on a platform and she has not shied away from her platform.
That's right.
And she's even, and despite what people have said in her office and everything, she continues to flow with it, right? There'll always be more people coming out of law school. There'll always be more attorneys looking for jobs. But at the end of the day, I think that for me, anything that I do, if I can't sleep with it at night, if I can't sleep with the choices I made or the decision I made, then the position is not worth it for me. And one of the things that I've been praying about this year is that I told God, like, if taking me to another platform in life is going to cause me to lose who I am, keep the platform.
That's right.
And I think we need more politicians out there that have that mentality, that humility to say, like, hey, if me getting in this position is going to cause me to lose the character of person who I am, keep the position, right? But we have to educate people on voting. We have to educate people on what SB 202 says, because there are some things that have gotten out there as misinformation. It's not about you not being able to give a person water in line. It's about the fact that they can't be within a certain distance of them actually being in the polling place, right? So how do we learn the rules and how do we learn to work within them is extremely important.
And the targeting of specific communities, because, even when you bring up SB 202, just the thunderous chorus of it doesn't affect me, and that's the point. That's the point, is it affects some people and it doesn't affect everybody. That's the whole point, is that by definition is injustice, that it's targeting some, and it happens to be, it's targeting the less privileged and it's not targeting the privileged. And that is the whole point when people are like, I've never had a problem. It's not, that's exactly the point, is, it just, to me, it's not rocket science when everyone that's protesting just rights and just, it's very personal, is Black or minority. And this is not to be divisive. This is to just, trying to bring people together, because you live for justice, making everybody, the playing field even for all people. And so when you hear just these choruses of, there's nothing wrong with it, it's not, that's the point, is it's nothing wrong with it in your world. Right. But can you hear the voices of somebody who might live in a neighborhood, and we could explain that one if we had about 90 hours, but that lives in a neighborhood that lives in a neighborhood where they don't have transportation. They have, I think, Georgia, I think just in Gwinnett County, I think I have the statistics in my iPad because I gave them off at one of my Why Justice Matters things, but we have like 35 less ballot boxes now, so those are all affecting certain populations in certain neighborhoods. It's just not rocket science to see. The bottom line is everybody should have the same access, even people that don't drive, because I know one of the things that SB 202 does is that they just totally discontinued that mobile unit in Fulton County. And so, so then taxpayer money that went to that mobile unit, now they're saying, no, you can't use it. All right, well, justice. If we're talking about justice, then everybody, people who, a senior invalid at home needs to have a right to vote. So, if you're going to discontinue the mobile unit that went out to neighborhoods that either didn't have transportation or people that can't move, maybe hospital, I don't know all the details, but everybody should have the same access to the poll, the same access. We have the same right. We're supposed to. By law, on paper, we do. But in reality, we have to all be able to access those polls as easily as people without a car need to be able to access the poll as easily as someone with a car, whatever that looks like. So, it's just, it's frustrating to just continue to see the same thing play out. It's just like, it's on a different stage this year, but it's the same thing it was, back,
in 1964.
Right.
And shifting from voting, right? So let's talk about the conscience of America, right, for a second.
Let's talk.
So interestingly enough, I had a chance to see Nancy Pelosi. She went over and visited Ukraine today, and as of today or yesterday, she's the highest elected official from the United States that has visited Ukraine. And I'm glad, because I don't like the war in Ukraine. Anybody knows my opinion on it. I think that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, right? But it was interesting how I stood over there and she said to the Ukrainian people, like, we got your back as long as this takes, as long as you guys in this fight, America has you, right? Jesus. And they're getting ready to approve $33 billion to give to Ukraine. And it
more.
They've
already given.
Yeah, they've probably given them a lot.
Billions.
So I'm just saying, and I don't have a problem with it. For me, I don't have a problem with it. My thing is that if we can move that quick for other countries.
Come on.
Is it not time for us to start looking in our own backyard and issues we have in our own backyard, like people not having access to healthcare, like people not having access to food, like people not having access to Black people not being able to get loans or shelter.
Come on.
If we can make that commitment to other people, and definitely when we talk about voting rights, right? I heard Al Sharpton say that that one of the things that has made Black America so upset with President Biden is that he said to us when he was running for president, he said that you had my back going into the election. I'm going to have your back when I get in office. To today, the only thing we got of him is the American Rescue Act, which didn't just affect the Black community, it affected the country as a whole, right? We haven't gotten voting rights passed. We haven't got the George Floyd Policing Act passed. We have not been able to get anything passed that we will, even to extend the child tax credit, right? Which did make a huge impact on the African-American community. None of that stuff has been able to get passed. And he's wondering why he is creating around 42%, I think it was today. But is it time for America to do some soul searching and stop helping everybody else out and look at our own territory and realize that, like, we got a lot of people over here who need help. And I'll let you kick off with that, Shane.
Yeah, I absolutely believe it's time. I think that just looking through history, I think America has always had, for lack of a better word, it's sort of like a caring complex. I don't know. We just always seem to be concerning ourselves with other people's things over our own. And I never really understood it, but this is sort of a historic pattern for America. And I really don't know why we can't just deal with home first. Maybe it's not a priority as much as, being able to contribute to other people's government for future reasons. Maybe there's something that we would want from them later. Maybe there's some leverage trying to be, some exchange. I don't know. But that seems to be with every president on some level. That seems to be the priority over the people. So this is, I don't think this is new. This is a recurring theme. I think that maybe whatever the imports or the exports or whatever it is, whatever kind of domination they're trying to create, I think that has changed over the decades. But I don't think the reality of being in another person's government for future favors or for future things, I think that has always been and perhaps always will be a priority over the people.
Well, I would say, to add to that, I think part of that, and you kind of see it, they don't, like you say, they run to the rescue of the Ukraine, Bosnia, and a bunch of other countries. But when it came to Haiti that needs some help, there was nothing. Puerto Rico.
And Puerto Rico is an American territory.
It's an American territory and still got didn't get any help. What the pattern I see is even outside of the country, it still will take care of, for lack of a better phrase, we'll take care of the Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian countries, but we will do very little to nothing when it comes to countries of color. That's what I see. And so when you compare it to how they operate here in the States, well, the people that need the help the most happen to be people of color.
That's right.
Now, granted, don't get me wrong, there are some people, whites, who are in need of help just like everyone else. However, we can it's okay. Exactly. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. But the overall picture is what I see. What outside of the country is the same thing that takes place inside the country.
I think I may have one issue with that, right? Because we paint the picture that Black people are the needy people in America, and I want to really kill that, right? So food stamps. Let's just use food stamps as a simple outline, right? That there are more Caucasian Americans on food stamps than there are Africans.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
By far,
yes,
right? So what I don't think, and I think that the problem is that until it affects their community, right? We don't have a problem with it. So we look at the programs that are predominantly African based, right? And that African Americans do, well, I don't want to call it do damage to, but that they use a lot. Medicare, right? Has been something that we've been on the chopping block about forever. But the reality is that Medicare has saved a lot of African American seniors, right? A lot of them get in the grave if it had not been for Medicare. But the reality is that Medicare is something that African Americans use a lot of. Medicaid is not so much. We're not the predominant users of Medicaid, and people don't understand that. We are not the predominant users of Medicaid, right? But then we look at some states like Georgia, where if we expanded, I was reading an article.
Right.
If Georgia actually expanded Medicaid to people, to citizens in the state of Georgia, you know who have the biggest impact by that? African Americans. The reason why they seem to want to keep it the way it is because majority of the people who are using Medicaid right now in the state of Georgia are not African American users, right? But if we expand it, it will open up access and give access to communities that did not have access to it before. So it seems like everything that, like the programs that benefit one side, we're okay with. Keep them rolling, right? In fact, if you get food stamps now, you may be getting an additional benefit on food stamps right now. But yet, we don't want to deal with Medicaid. We don't want to deal with Medicare. We don't want to deal with Social Security. And these are all programs that we know that are predominantly African Americans use more. My grandmother depended on her Social Security check until the day she died. One of the most heartbreaking moments of her life, I remember, was when there's a certain point of Medicare where, like, if you get Medicare, if you don't qualify, like they would take out whatever, like $136 or $140 out of your Social Security check in order to pay for your Medicare, right? You help pay for your Medicare. I still remember the day when that happened to my grandmother, her calling me on the phone for $136, crying because she didn't know how she was going to pay her bills, short because she was short that $136. And I remember having to get on the phone with the state of Florida, calling them and saying, hey, she can't afford to pay this. Is there anything you can do? And we had to end up getting that recouped. But it made a huge difference in her life, right? But yet, food stamps, which is something that she rarely used, they only gave her $2 or $3 a month in food stamps. And she had to save those food stamps up for like 4 or 5 months in order to be able to buy something decent with it, right? I can't go with the metaphor like I love the fact that certain people will say that but Black people are just abusing all these programs. That's not true. If you look at PPP, you look at EIDL loans, right? Majority of the people who benefited from that, you got Tom Brady got millions of dollars from that.
That's right.
Millions of dollars from that. And Tom Brady didn't need it. But yet a Black person would go to their bank that they've been banking with for 20 years, 30 years, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. I'm calling you out. Sorry.
Call them out.
They would bank with them for 20 or 30 years and they'll tell them, hey, you hold up, let us finish processing these loans and we'll come back to you. And then when they came back to them, they said to them, oh, we ran out of money, right? I know people who had to go to banks outside of their banks.
Absolutely.
And you know some of them, right?
Folks,
who had to go out to banks outside their banks because the big banks that they banked with their whole life would not even help them.
Right.
And you don't see any place else where we had to make special laws and rules and regulations to say, hey, you know what? We're going to allocate $20 million for only Black banks, and those Black banks have to go after Black constituents, right? There's no other race in America that we had that problem, right? And that's, I think that's important that when we talk about it, it's the benefits that it seems like people want to go after the ones that we tend to use, right? But the reality is that I don't know how we as a nation, I say this all the time, but yesterday I was speaking at somebody's church for the anniversary, and I was speaking about the principle of how we sometimes need silent time with God. And it hit me while I was preaching, like the reason why most people don't want silent time with God is because it would require you to look too much at yourself.
Come on.
And one of the hardest things for us to do is to look at ourselves. The reason why America's so easy to go help Ukraine, because as long as I'm helping Ukraine, I don't have to look at what's going on in my own backyard. As long as I'm helping or fighting Russia, I don't have to deal with what's going on in my own backyard. But the reality is that if America is not willing to look at what's going on in its own backyard, we're the epitome of what a democracy is. This is not a democracy, what we have now, where people go out and vote and we try to hinder their votes. And we say, hey, since we can't ask you like how many jelly beans are in this jar, then you know what we'll do? We'll tell you don't pass out water in line. We won't feed you in line. We'll make grandma go wait for 4 or 5 hours, right, in line, knowing that if she have to wait 4 or 5 hours, her child gonna come get her and be like, nah, mom, we just gonna go home, right? I'm gonna scare you. And we've had people call our office and say, hey, I don't know whether I can even vote, if I'm legally able to vote. And they'll call a probation officer, and the probation officer is telling them, I don't know. But the law states that if you want to find out if you can get your rights restored as an offender, you have to reach out to the parole board. But the parole board is telling you that you don't know. So, I mean, I think that we have to get to a point where we really search the conscience of our nation.
Yes.
And I tell people in 2021, I tell people in 2020, I'm telling the same thing now, that this is not really a ballot about Brian Kemp. It's not about Governor Perdue. It's about the soul of this nation, like who we're going to be going forward.
Right.
And this election is just as important.
That's true.
I agree. And the irony of a lot of, like what you're talking about is, see, people only see things the way they know them. In other words, like, some communities can't even conceive that grandma was Shady trying to talk?
No.
You weren't? Okay. They can't even conceive of, grandma being in line 4 to 5 hours to vote, grandma in a wheelchair in the heat being in line. So people can't even understand why water's a big deal, because they live in a community where everybody, just walks in and walks out, and they have way more, an inordinate amount of polling locations, ballot boxes. They're just almost begging for votes in their communities. And so it's not even on the table to think about that, some people are still so desperate for that right to vote that their ancestors have fought and died and been just brutalized for decades. And that it means that much that they would actually line up for even, 7 or 10 hours. They will line up like that. Yes, need water. Some people that just can't figure out, why would you need, water's not a big deal. Yeah, well, you don't live in a community where the right to vote is so precious and still, so it's still unattainable, the exact equal right, that they don't even understand. They can't even comprehend that a senior citizen would be sitting out there, as long as it takes, because that vote is that precious to them. Go ahead. You're trying to say something.
No, I was going to say, you know what? I think I was sitting here while I was listening to you thinking, like, when did I realize that as a Black man, I was less than in America, right? And I would have to go back to New Orleans, right? When we seen Hurricane Katrina rip through New Orleans, and we knew that New Orleans was a very much predominantly African-American neighborhood, right? And the president of the United States got on a plane and flew over New Orleans and looked out the window at the people who were suffering. And that was one of the worst images we have of that moment, right? And that's when it hit me, like, when I realized that, you know what, we're not as valuable. But the crazy part is that even talking about Elon Musk buying Twitter, right? I was reading an article the other day, how they call Twitter the Black Twitter, right? How most of the people who are on there, who have built platforms off of it, has been the African-American community, right? They really have used Twitter to their benefit. And now we have somebody and even to the fact where Twitter, and I learned this other day, has literally hired people, Black people, to kind of say, how do we go after more Black people? How do we get more Black people to sign up for Twitter? How do we get them to use Twitter more, right? But to think about that, like, Black people are the largest consumer in America by far. You give us a stipend check, where other parts of America are going to take that stipend check, put in their savings account, put in their children's savings account, split up $200 per child. Black people go to Walmart, okay? We want to go to Publix, we want to go to Kroger's, we want to get what we need for our household, right? And we spend the money constantly. That's the reason why it's not uncommon for you to go into, like, you'll look in rural areas, there's not a Walmart there. But you find a rural Black area, you'll find a huge super Walmart in the middle of the rural Black area.
That's
You
right.
can look at Quincy, Florida as a prime example, right? But I think about even too, Governor DeSantis, the great governor down in Florida, they went a step further than Georgia went with their voting rights bill. That last week, he actually signed the law saying that not only do we have voter restrictions, right? We're going to have a police department that's dedicated just to voting, right?
Wow.
Literally. So for Black people who are already afraid of police, he created a police department that literally all they do is going to be dealing with voting issues. And out of 1.4 million people who voted, they only found, or they've only been, last thing I read was like 94 people were actually accused of voting fraud. And so far to date, they were only able to turn over 44 of those people to the DA's office, the state attorney's office. And out of the 44 they turned over, only 2 have been prosecuted. And the 2 that was prosecuted were people who probably voted for DeSantis.
Wow.
But yet they created a whole police force, police force. And now I've heard that states like Georgia, states like Texas is looking at those kind of options. So we have a lot of work to do in America.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And go ahead. You go ahead. I've been talking too much. Go ahead. We can see.
No. I'm just wow.
Yeah. And when we talk about, a lot of the issues you've been talking about, like when you talked about Medicare and Medicaid, if, like looking deeper at those issues, I mean, at the root of it all is that, well, I mean, that would be a whole different conversation, but the systemic racism that's in place and all of these in healthcare period, um, it's awful. And the fact that healthcare, and I know that this is controversial, but the fact that in this country, like who's using Medicare, who's using Medicaid, it's just sad
Absolutely.
that in this civilized society that we don't have, everybody doesn't have, just the fact that you're an American citizen doesn't mean that you're going to be able to see a doctor. If you can be in
That's
pain, you can literally have your insides of your stomach falling out, or have, just something pushing out on something. And literally, now I know technically, I guess you can go to the emergency room, but the point is, we all that if you don't have insurance and you don't have health care, then you are not treated. You do not have the same medical care. And so you don't have the same longevity of life. And, how all of that just snowballs. But, there's so much depth to what you were talking about the conscience of America. And the irony of a lot of that, when people look, like you were talking about, how black communities, black people get a bad rap for this or that, and it's not even factual. And I was sitting there as you were describing that, thinking, not only is some of these things not factual, but the thing is that the injustices that were created in those systems were created by the ancestors of the very people that are sitting there, just
absolutely.
judging and condemning and some people, honestly, like through generations, really just don't know. They do not have any clue how this got to be or that got to be. They do not know. And then, they just rely on whatever narrative has come through their, family or their communities and their friends and everything like that. But when you were describing all of that, I just was thinking, the people that are sitting there in judgment of that, are the people that created those systems in the first
That's
place.
right.
That,
That's right.
until, like you said, until everybody can, you always talk about looking at the man in the mirror, and until, we can just look at ourselves. And that's why I think historical context is so important, because sometimes people just have a wrong perspective of things, because they don't
Absolutely.
understand, like, well, it got to be this way because these
That's
people,
right.
Black Wall Street was burned down, or, every
That's
time
right.
there was, black wealth, they got torched and murdered,
That's
and
right.
start over at square one again. So,
That's right.
until that's why it's so important, because otherwise people are just left to draw their own conclusions, and they're wrong conclusions like that. Like, well, black people are
Right.
just using up the system, and black people are just doing, and they don't understand. They do not. And that's why I think it's so important to, but then when truth is spoken, it needs to be received and not just resisted. And that just speaks to a deeper root of, you really do think you're superior, you're supreme,
That's right.
you really do. And those things come out,
Right.
they come out in ways like where they do not want to hear anything about, the land of the free and the home of the brave. And it doesn't have anything to do with patriotism or anything else. It's just facts. It's facts. And if we want to change the way things are, we have to come to terms with what we did to get here, so we don't do it again.
So let me ask this question. How much of what we've learned over the years that the media has a role to play in what we learn, as far as our candidates, as far as the rules that are coming down the pipeline, whether new or old, the narrative that's being laid out when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare, who's using it, who isn't, abortions, and so on and so forth. How much of a role does the media play?
A lot.
I think huge. I was just sitting here thinking when Pastor Lisa was talking, I've worked a lot of property management, and I've done a lot of Section 8 and Section 42. And the perception is that Black people are on Section 8. I can tell you from my own life, from working in it every day, there are just as many white people on Section 8 and Section 42 than there are Black people and other minority people. And you talk about the soul of a nation. The government gives veterans what they call HUD-VASH, which is equivalent to Section 8. I can't tell you how many communities will not take a HUD voucher from a veteran, and a veteran who has, I mean, everybody deserves fair housing, fair, clean housing. These are veterans, and they will not take that voucher. And those veterans will end up homeless or in a shelter or in some deplorable rat infested, cockroach infested. And these are people who served our country. So I know the narrative, when you look at television, you see Black people on welfare, single moms on welfare. It's just as many of everybody else as it is us. But that's just not what you see, you know? And people will say, like Pastor Lisa was saying, oh, well, veterans, you know, they get guaranteed housing, they get guaranteed loans, but who gives them the house? Who approves the loan? Who approves the mortgage? And there's steps that people don't see, that the media is not showing you. They're just telling you, oh, well, you know, if you go to the military, you serve 4 years, you get a free house, or you get a free, a non-red tape mortgage. And that's just not true. There are more homeless veterans, you know, from all over. I mean, from every single branch of the military, because they can't get housing. You know, they give them vouchers. The vouchers don't work. You know, there's no connecting the dots. So it's just a really deplorable place to be. And, you know, when you speak of soul of a nation, I mean, these are our veterans. You know, how much worse can you get? These are people who served.
And this is the reason why I want you guys on here. I knew that this would probably be one of my longest podcasts.
We like to talk.
It was well worth it. And we didn't even get into like all the topics because I wanted to talk about Judge Jackson and so many other things that have going on in America now. But we have run out of time. And thank you for Dana, and I see Miss Diane Robinson, who was commenting during the time. But we have run out of time, but we would love to continue this conversation another time and bring you guys back on for a round 2 like you guys have done before. With just why justice matters. But I think that we have to continue the dialogue. I think we have to continue the conversation. I do want to remind everybody out there who's watching that we do have major events coming up through Black Push. We have a One Accord Conference coming up in Augusta on May 21st.
Yes.
Then we followed by in Macon, June
25th.
25th, we'll be in Macon. And then in the month of July 16th, we'll actually host our Black Push. We'll actually have our inauguration gala, where we'll be talking about a night of service, where we'll be honoring people like Sonona Clayton, Ambassador Young, Helen Butler, Latasha Brown, Reverend Timothy McDonald, Reverend Shannon Jones, Sandra Williams from the Atlanta, North Georgia Labor Council, Mr. Hank Jones,
Henry Hank
Thomas.
Yes.
And we're actually going to be presenting our first ever John Lewis Award on that night. So we are super excited about that. And continue to check out our website. For those who are not registered to vote, please go to mvp.sos.ga.gov. Know your status, know where you can go vote, know where your early voting place is at, knowing that it started today. I've already got my sticker saying I voted, but we need not only my voice, we need everybody's voice. So join us at the poll. And I think on May 18th, stay tuned to our website, but we're going to have a national early voting day throughout the whole state of Georgia. A whole bunch of different nonprofits are coming together to make that day the day that we actually get out and vote. So join us, and until tomorrow, kudos.
All right.
All right.